Welcome. This is the latest video in our Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra series, verse 65. And now we begin a whole new section of the text, which is on the bliss practices, the Ananda practices. So one could say that the goal of these dozen or so practices is to cultivate and maximize your ability to experience joy, Ananda. Or one could say that the real goal is to access the natural state of consciousness, of being, in which joy is just naturally much more accessible to you. I favor that interpretation. There's no way, of course, to have constant joy, constant happiness. I suppose it depends what you mean by the term joy, right? Because the great tantric master Abhinavagupta argues there is the one kind of joy. He enumerates 7 kinds of joy, 7 kinds of ananda, and there's one kind of joy called jagadananda, and that's the joy of being 100% okay with the coming and going of all that comes and goes. So that jagadananda is the one form of ananda that can be permanent, right? But all other forms of bliss come and go, just as all other phenomena come and go. Okay, and still, even for the kind of types of joy that are ecstatic and blissful and intense, why not have that experience? Why not enjoy that experience in this body, right? The tradition also has practices for feeling the suffering of all beings, for breathing in the suffering of all beings and breathing out compassion to all those suffering beings, including yourself. And it's also a tradition in which we seek balance, right? So the cultivation of joy, even when there's lots of suffering in the world, or the world seems to be in a challenging place, as one might put it. In fact, one might say we can't afford not to cultivate joy in challenging times. Because if you don't have any joy inside yourself, what do you have to share? What do you have to give to others? How are you going to uplift anyone if you have no spark of joy in yourself in challenging times? So I would make the argument that we can't afford not to cultivate joy. And the fact that many are suffering is no reason not to cultivate joy. In fact, it's a good reason to cultivate it and offer it, right? So having said that, let's look at the first of these Ananda practices, these bliss practices. And if you explore all of these over the next weeks, it just might be the case that you experience more bliss and joy than you ever have before. And it also might not be the case, right? Because there are many factors that go into what sort of experience is accessible to you. So open in quietly joyful anticipation of nothing in particular, because you don't know what's going to happen. But it's worth a try. It's worth experimenting, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the first of the bliss practices, right? As usual, in my own translation, and there are other translations out there, but I think I like to try to give you guys the most straightforward possible translation. So let's look at the verse together. Sarvaṃ jagat svadehaṃ va svānandabharitaṃ smaret yugapan svaमृtenaiva parānandamayo bhavet. So I just see there's maybe a typo. Maybe not. Maybe it looks like a typo, but maybe that's what appears in the manuscripts. Okay, got to check that. But usually you would have yugapat before an S sound, not yugapan. Okay, excuse me for having a moment there. But let's do it again with what I believe is going to be the correct reading. I'm going to have to check. So yugapat, everything else the same. Sing with me if you like. Sarvaṃ jagat svadehaṃ va svānandabharitaṃ smaret yugapat svaṃṛtenaiva parānandamayo bhavet. Meditate on your own body or the whole world as full of your innate joy. Through that inner nectar, that inner nectarian bliss, you will suddenly experience parānanda, sublime joy. Okay, so let's break that down. We see the word va, or, and this happens many times, or quite a number of times in the Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra, where it said, do this practice with your body or the whole world. Now, when that is given, when that sort of option is given, really what's intended is you first do the practice with your body and then with the whole world. So it's not optional in that sense. It's not like, oh, what do I feel like today? You know, it's more, first you're going to do it with your own body, which is a microcosm of the whole world, and then you're going to be able to do it with the whole world. Okay, so what is it that you're doing? You are meditating or contemplating your own body, and later the whole world, as svānandabharitaṃ, filled with your innate joy. Filled with your innate joy. So not just any joy, but your innate joy. The joy that is actually intrinsic to consciousness itself. So we'll come back to that point. I also want to note that the word full or filled with, bharita, is cognate with the word bhairava, right? And the author, it's absolutely explicit and clear in this text that the author likes to play with words in this way. That this word bharita recalls bhairava or bhairavi, right? The forms of Shiva and Shakti that are the deities of this text, right? So the whole world is full of, is holding, is bearing this innate bliss. But you can only realize that if you first realize it within your own body. Now notice the somatic emphasis, which is interesting to us today, because in a more standard yogic text or non-tantric text, we would see something like your own mind or your own chitta, right? But here it's a focus more on the body. So that's interesting, right? And so then, by virtue of this innate nectar, this innate amrita, right? This capacity that we have, you know, neurologists would say an innate capacity within the brain, right? To generate bliss or joy independent of external circumstance. This idea of the nectar of immortality, right? That some people today associate with the activation of the pineal gland in the center of the brain. I don't know about that. I notice a lot of people saying that who are not neurologists, but who knows? Maybe that's part of it. And this experience that you can have, which can be more or less literal, of something that feels like this incredibly sweet divine nectar dripping down, as it were, from the center of your brain and into the back of your throat or into your mouth, you know. So some people experience that very literally and others more figuratively, this amrita dripping down, right? And this experience is very much known to these ancient sages, and they were fascinated with this particular experience, and it crops up a lot. So by virtue of this innate nectar, this innate capacity within consciousness, or if you're a materialist, within the brain, you're going to be able to experience this parānanda, this sublime bliss, this sublime joy, or this unsurpassable joy, or this joy which is sort of beyond anything you ever felt or knew or tasted before. Those are the senses or meanings of the word para, right? So it could be para, sublime, or it could even be para, the supreme goddess you see pictured above my head there. Not coincidentally, we do tantric practices of visualizing the goddess above our head. And para is a name for the supreme goddess of the Trika lineage, who is indeed mentioned and venerated in this particular text. So it could be a play there. It could be sublime bliss, but also the bliss of goddess Para Devi of the Trika lineage, right? So perhaps both are intended, right? So I say experience in the translation, but what do we have literally in the Sanskrit? Parānandamayo bhavet. You will become made of sublime bliss. In fact, I should probably just amend the translation, because it doesn't say experience. It says through this practice, through accessing your innate amrita, you will become made of this sublime bliss, or this bliss of the goddess Para. So that's maybe more evocative than the banal word experience. Okay, so let's do the actual practice. Let's do the practice of this, what we might call Ananda Nyasa, installation of or activation of this capacity for innate bliss in all the parts of the body. Now, whether this is exactly the practice that the original author had in mind, I can't say, but I think it's quite likely that this is the practice that he or she had in mind, which is, again, the nyasa, the installation or activation of something, in this case bliss, in all the parts of the body. And for those of you who were at my San Francisco workshops, we had a great turnout at that San Francisco workshops, maybe 80 of you or something like that. We did this practice there recently, a couple of weeks back. So now we'll do it here. So please take a comfortable posture in which you're sitting gently upright, relaxed, but letting the spine elongate a bit. Okay, just taking a couple of deep breaths. And feeling a strong container, a safe space all around yourself. You may wish to visualize a wall of fire springing up at the perimeter of your home or your room with the mantra Ram, Ram, Ram. Traditionally, if we're generating a lot of Ananda Shakti or bliss energy, we want to create a safe space or container for that practice. Okay, so now I'd like to invite you to remember a time where you felt pure joy. Don't think about it too long. Just let one come to you. a time where you felt pure joy. And now, keep the feeling, keep the energetic, emotional, somatic feeling of that joy, and let go the memory, let go the image of that moment in time. And just keep the feeling with you. Even if you only feel it a little tiny bit, it's okay. Now ask yourself, if this joy had a color, what color might it be? Just be intuitive. Don't think about it. Whatever color comes to mind, and stick with it. And if it had a frequency of vibration, or perhaps a texture or a temperature, what would that be? Okay, so now you have some sensual reference points for this Ananda Shakti, this power or energy of joy. It's got a color and or a temperature and or a frequency and or a texture. Now stick with that. Whatever kind of joy this is, we're going to stick with it. It needs no other labels. And now, take that joy and place it in your feet. Imagine that joy energy sparkling or buzzing or dancing or vibrating in your feet with the color it has. And you could either be keeping the body still throughout this practice, or you could gently be moving to touch each body part if you feel so moved to do that. Feel so inclined. You can touch each body part reverently, lovingly, if possible. And so now we'll continue to install this Ananda Shakti in each part of the body, in the ankles, feeling it or visualizing it with the color, and so on. Installing it now in the calves, both calves. And in the shins. And in the knees. And in the thighs. Continuing to maintain awareness of the color or texture or temperature that you feel in connection with this joy. You're now installing it in the buttocks, in the hip creases, in the pelvic floor, in the genitals, in the whole pelvic region, in the low belly, in the sacrum, in the whole belly, in the whole low back, lumbar region. Now going to the hands, installing this Ananda Shakti in the hands. And in the forearms, the entire forearm, both sides. And in the elbows. And in the upper arms. And now, returning to the torso. Install it, please, in the solar plexus. And then the whole heart region. And the chest. And behind the heart, the mid-back, thoracic spine. And between the shoulder blades. And install it in the shoulder blades. In the shoulders. Staying present with your originally chosen color and temperature, texture, vibration. Installing it in the collarbones. Now the entire torso, the entire body up to the base of the throat and neck is full of this energy. Now you're installing it in the throat and neck. And now you're installing it in both cheeks. In the jaw and the mouth. And then in both ears. The nose. The eyes. The third eye. The forehead. The temples. The back of the head. The whole of the head. The crown of the head. The whole body. The whole body. Filled with this scintillating or vibrating Ananda Shakti. letting there be a gentle half smile on your face as you bask and saturate in this feeling of the energy of joy. Even if it's only a little accessible to you, bask in that. Indeed, even if you don't feel the joy, but you still have the color and the texture, just bask in that. Saturate in that. And let this Ananda Shakti, whether you feel it or not, let it seep into every single cell of the body. Let it saturate every cell of the body. And finally, to conclude, imagine or feel, if you can, that this Ananda Shakti thickens into the physical body. Imagine or feel, if you can, that the physical body is the coalescence of this Ananda Shakti into physical form. That this physical body is an expression of this body of bliss. And coming back to the sensation of the physical body if you haven't already. Perhaps even running your hands over the physical body. And if you can, feel just a glimmer of the possibility that this physical body is a concrete, tangible expression of the body of bliss, the Anandakaya. Om. Okay, that's the practice. So this is one that you can cultivate over time. And this is one that it can be okay to share with others after not such a long time. It's the sort of practice that you don't have to have mastered before sharing it with others. But I want to emphasize the key steps there, that we remembered an experience of sublime joy from life, and then we dropped the memory or the image, and we stayed with the feeling, and we gave it color, frequency, texture, and or temperature, right? Any or all of those. And then we installed it part by part in the body, sort of like the rotation of consciousness you do in Yoga Nidra, but here it's a nyasa of Ananda Shakti. This is a really powerful practice. It's a really beautiful practice. It's a very sweet practice. Take your time with it. Enjoy it, right? And having done this practice a number of times, then after a while, well, maybe a couple months of practicing it, you can begin to experience, perhaps even spontaneously, that the entire world is full of this Ananda Shakti at some level. What that means is that the potentiality for experiencing joy exists in everything, right? You may not access it or unlock it most of the time, right? But in every sensual experience, every single one, there's a potential for joy, right? In this whole world, everything has this potential for experiencing it in a joyous mode. It doesn't mean you should be experiencing it that way. It just means it has that potential. And so I just want to conclude, I want to turn to Shivopadhyāya's commentary. And by the way, anyone who's watching live can type comments or questions in the chat window. And to conclude, turning to Shivopadhyāya's commentary, we see that he says that you start to experience this innate joy of awareness, Chidananda, this innate joy that is intrinsic to awareness itself, as being everywhere in the world, as if the whole world is full of your innate joy, right? Not just some random abstract divine joy, but your innate joy, the joy intrinsic to your consciousness itself, is actually in this experience or mode of experiencing everywhere. The whole world is purna, full of this chidananda, this intrinsic joy of awareness. And Shivopadhyāya tells us, borrowing a phrase from Kshemaraja in the Recognition Sutras, he tells us we experience the whole world as ashyana chid rasa, as the nectarian essence of awareness in tangible form. And ashyana means coagulation or coalescence or crystallization, like liquid sap of a tree crystallizes. So he says you experience this whole world as this liquid essence of awareness, that has become coagulated into tangible form. So that's discussed in Recognition Sutras, chapter, is it 4 or 5? It's one of those. And clearly Shivopadhyāya has read that. He seems to have that in mind. And finally, he quotes this beautiful verse that we've talked about here in the Facebook group and shared a video on the YouTube channel as well, which is that beautiful verse, Purnamada Purnamidam. He gives that verse in his commentary, saying it's found in the Vajrasaneya Brahmana, right? Which it is, as well as found in the Upanishads. And this verse, the commentator says, sums up this experience of first this innate joy within oneself, within one's own body, and then in the whole world. So the verse goes like this. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. That is perfect, whole, and complete in itself. This is perfect, whole, and complete. from this perfect wholeness arises or springs forth. And if perfect wholeness is taken away from this perfect wholeness, what remains is the same perfect wholeness. Om. May each one of us experience and know this state of sublime fullness, the state of sublime joy. Once again, it's a joy to be with all of you. Makes it a little easier for many, including me, to experience this joy in connection. Someone writes in the chat window, it's like a reminder that the source of this feeling comes from within us, that it can be sparked by the things around us, but it's within us all the time. That is indeed the teaching. The wellspring of joy is within, and you can learn how to tap it more and more. And then it's as if more things around you trigger it, but actually it's just that you have more access to your natural state of joy, of Ananda. Whether it's quiet joy or excited joy, it comes in many varieties. And remember, to conclude, Abhinavagupta's very, very beautiful teaching, that there's one kind of joy which doesn't come and go, which is permanent. And that is the joy of being deeply okay with the coming and going of all that comes and goes. The arising and subsiding of all that arises and subsides. May we all be 100% okay with that. Joyously okay with that. Om.